Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends and guests and members. It is July the 11th, 2022, and this is a regular meeting of the West Shore Photography Club. So welcome aboard. We have a competition tonight, but before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about upcoming events. I want to remind you that because it is summer, we backed off a little bit, and next Monday night, July the 18th, there will be no meeting, okay? But I'm going to turn it over to Joe now to talk about other things that are upcoming, trips, and the meeting on July the 25th. Okay, Joe?
Okay, well, we have a trip coming up this weekend. Mike, I see you're on. Can you give us an update on Lily Ponds for us?
The trip coming up on Saturday is at Lily Ponds, which is near Adamstown, Maryland. It's actually a commercial venture to sell water plants. I think there's maybe 10, 12 ponds there. They're all loaded with lotus, with lily pads, with just all kinds of things as far as water plants go. And Saturday is going to be a special day. It's a day kind of reserved for artists. So there'll be photographers there, painters there. And if you go, you'll be there as far as one of the artists involved. So there will be, since it's a special day, there'll be a food truck with Mexican food. There's a porch they can sit on, that you can sit on and relax. It's very flat. The shots you'll get are totally natural. The ponds look supernatural. Not supernatural, they look very natural. And there'll be gobs of shots to be had for sure. This is their first time to reserve a day for artists. So how it's going to go is anyone's guess. It's supposed to get warmer in the afternoon, so you may want to go in the morning, but they open at 9. You can stay, all afternoon if you wish. They're very, very accommodating to artists. And in fact, they have a section probably in their retail shop for photographers and painters to put stuff up to sell. It should be good. It's a 90-minute drive, so you're going to have to set the alarm, all you retired people. And it's also not far. It's about 10 miles from Frederick, Maryland, which the downtown Frederick is awesome. So if you want to just go in the morning to the Lily Ponds and then maybe get lunch at Frederick or shop a little bit or something, it's really nice, the downtown. Free of charge to walk right into Lily Ponds and watch painters paint and so on.
Mike, have you set a specific time for the group to meet?
It said 10 o'clock on the email that comes out. I'm going to be there a little earlier. I'm going to be in Frederick already. I have a photography thing I have to do there. So I'll get there hopefully around 9:30. The actual literature will say 10 o'clock. So I'll come back to, I guess, the parking lot around 10 o'clock.
Okay, so except for the date, the details are the same as went out in the original email?
That's correct.
Okay, I will resend that email though tomorrow with, of course, the corrected date.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good. And for the 23rd, the following Saturday, we have an educational session set up at Bass Pro Shop. And this is unusual to think that we're going to have a waterfall photography workshop outside at Bass Pro, but it's a perfect venue for learning. And this year, it's going to be Curtis Wilkie will be there, Mark Abano, myself, and probably some others who are going to have 3 different, we'll call them sessions. We'll have a novice, we'll have an intermediate, and an advanced. And we'll take, for those that have done waterfall shots before, you might want to take the advanced, because we're going to get into some real advanced techniques that you maybe not have tried before. And for those that are new, this is absolutely a perfect time, because it's a great place to practice. And we're doing this in anticipation for a waterfall trip that we're going to really do in the fall. Mark and I went down, and the summertime rather, just doesn't quite make it. And so we're going to wait until the fall, and this will be practice for that. And that's the 23rd Bass Pro Shop, and that's at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then on the 25th, we have a member show and tell. Mark, do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, we've done shows, things like this before. We call them before and after, where you put in a picture that you took and how you processed it. But there's been people that have asked if they can just show pictures, that interests them that they like to share. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to allow you to either, sorry, my phone just went off. We're going to allow you to either do the before and after, or put a picture in or two that you just want to show. You might, for whatever reason, you want to show the picture. You're just proud of it, want to show it off. You did something different, whatever. And so there'll be instructions sent out on how to label your pictures, so we know what the purpose of them is, whether before and after or just something you want to show. And it'll be the typical thing. You'll have 5 minutes to talk about it, including any feedback from the crowd. And that'll be on the 25th.
Mark, will they need to submit those images ahead of time?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That's going to be in the email that goes out. It'll have the instructions of when they're due by and all that kind of stuff.
Very
And
good.
the size of it. They need to be JPEGs. I don't want them too big, so I want to be able to manage them a little bit.
Okay. And thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. Just, I'm going to rattle off a couple of other things we have coming up for the summer. We have a trip to Fort Hunter for landscape photography. We have a program on Wednesday evening, late afternoon evening at Messiah. It's a photo adventure. That's an educational session that we're going to be doing. We're going to have a sunflower trip, and we're going to have a Ashcombe greenhouse inside and out this summer. So we have all those coming up, and you'll get notices and information on that. And with that, Dennis, I am done.
Very good. Thanks, Joe. As you know, this evening is a competition, and I warned you that we wanted your best work. And as a result, we've selected a gentleman who has judged competitions at the state and national level. And I've asked him to be critical with your images, because if you think this is your best work, then you should hear from a qualified professional as to how he honestly feels, about the image. So we're going to turn it over to Bryson. Bryson, you can share your screen and any information about yourself. Most of the folks have heard you speak before, but you're welcome to make some remarks if you care to, and then we'll get into the competition.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you stole a little bit of my thunder. I was going to say that the entries this week or this month were so good that the only thing that I could possibly do is really get critical, because you kind of have to look for the minor flaws in a really, really good image. So the first thing I'll say right up front is, a lot of the stuff, most of the stuff tonight is exceptional. And really shows that, you people are doing some really nice work. So you get to the point where, I know when I first started going into competition a long, long time ago, one of my mentors said to me, you don't go to a competition to win. You go to a competition to learn why your stuff isn't as good as the stuff that scored higher. So the learning part of it is, I think, the really important part. If you get a 9 and the other guy got a 10 or the other guy got an 8, that's interesting. But, by tomorrow morning, you're going to forget who got what score. It's whether or not you learn something from the the analysis, if you will, of the images. And that's something that has helped me for a long time, is just simply you put your stuff out, whether it's in a competition or a critique or just showing it to another one of your friends. They're going to see things that you don't see. And I have a couple of students, and one in Indiana who sends me things all the time with the simple idea that, okay, what am I missing as far as processing this image is concerned? And usually it's not very much. He's pretty good, but every once in a while I'll pick something up and I'll say, you know, did you look at this, or you missed this, or this could be a little better, or whatever. Some of it is subjective. There's always, you know, I'm going to see a picture differently than you do. But a lot of it is, you know, oh, I didn't see that. Thank you for the comment. That's going to help me think about this maybe a little bit more the next time. Let me share the screen here and see if we can get on the way. How's that? Is it showing up?
Yes.
Good to go, huh? All right. Now we have 20 pictures, and I am going to be critical. And I'm going to be critical, not to be nasty or anything, but just to say, okay, this is good. What would I do a little differently? I know some people say, well, I don't care what you think. It's what I want to do that counts. Well, that's fine as long as your image is 100%. But what I would do, because I look at things, and believe me, this what I'm going to say about your image is exactly what I do with my images. So I'm not telling you to do anything different. I'm trying to tell you, okay, here's what I would do when I was if I were looking at this image and it were on my computer, how would I change it? Okay, this is nice. This is really good. I like the leading lines. I like the flow. I like the basic overall composition. I don't think it's by any stretch of the imagination a poor image. I think it's a very good image. I like particularly the people in the background here, because otherwise it would just simply be stuff, right? Okay, it's interesting from an architectural standpoint, but what is it that makes it an interesting image? What do you go to with your eye? Well, the composition leads you to the people, and the darkness of the foreground and the fact that they're essentially picking up some more light back here, you do automatically go to the people, which is a good thing. Now, let's be super critical. This line is vertical. These appear to be vertical, but the further off you get to the right, the more the image tilts, that the top is going off to the right compared to the bottom. You say, wow, that's really, really close to being vertical. That's close, but it's not vertical. If you're working in Lightroom, you do have, in the develop module, you do have a thing called transform. And that's where you want to work to solve these issues. The problem is you cannot rotate an image and then transform it. You have to always establish a center vertical and then transform the vertical so that both the left and right of the image change at the same time. If you rotate the image and get one side straight and then try to use the transform of the verticals, the image is just going to get crazy on you, and you're not going to be able to figure out what's wrong. So always try to set up some kind of a center vertical that is absolutely correct, and then use the transform tool to make both sides work together. You do that, you'll be more successful. This is a very minor point. It's not a big deal. In fact, I think this is probably close to a 9 image. This is an 8 point something, if you will. You got to remember, I think in partial numbers. Otherwise, you just give everybody a 9 and go home. Now, that point on the verticals is going to show up on several of the images tonight, because it is something that's very important in the way that your images sit in the frame. And I am an architectural photographer. So verticals for me are very, very important and critical as to the way an image sits in the frame. Here again, we have convergence. Now you're looking up at a subject, you would expect convergence. If the convergence is very obvious and you're looking up and it's strong and it creates its own perspective, that's not a problem. But when it's minor, sometimes it can interfere with the general overall look of the image. In this case, it's sort of halfway between minor and what's wrong with this image. Okay, so do you see how this is tilted in over here on the left-hand edge? That would bother me enough to make a change. This appears to be close to vertical. Can you see my?
Yes, we can see it.
You can. Okay.
Yes.
I would make this vertical, not this. And then once this was vertical, then I would work with transform to see if I could, improve on what's happening on the outside edges. And it's a minor thing, and it may not bother you. That may be you say, okay, I don't mind that, so leave it well enough alone. Compositionally, I think if it were a little bit more off to the left instead of dead center, maybe I could see a little more bridge over here so that these lines would lead in. It would balance a little bit better. Then comes the big problem of this baby sitting right underneath my primary subject. Whenever you take a picture like this, one of the things you want to do, you talk about chimping on the back of your camera. Look at the picture on the back of the camera, not through the lens. Because when you see it as a two-dimensional image, sometimes you see that image differently than you do when you're looking through the viewfinder, and it will help you make decisions on composition. I would either move to the right, which would move this off to the left, or move to the left, which would move this off to the right. I think I would go left because that's going to allow me to see a little bit more of the structure in here, and it's going to move this underneath the bridge. If you could get higher, it would be great. Now I realize, okay, this is probably a tourist shot, so you were there, and you don't carry a ladder around with you when you're touristing. So getting higher may not be an option. But if you can get this thing underneath that bridge where you could, if you're working only in Lightroom, for example, you could take a gradient and bring it up from the bottom and darken this all foreground down to the point that it really becomes less important than this. So the tonal values in the image have to be most important at the subject and less important at the exteriors or surrounds. So you want to darken this down so that the subject, the primary subject, is really where your eye goes with no question whatsoever, instead of bouncing back and forth between two things. The other thing, just because, is that we have a color issue here where the primary subject has muted colors and, a little bit of yellows up in here, etc. And then we have this blue sky, which is really saturated. The eye tends to go to the brightest area in an image, or it will follow a compositional movement or something of that nature. It will go for contrast, it will go for brightness, and then it will go for the strongest color. And in this case, I think the strength of the blue in that sky is actually fighting with the primary subject. I would tend to desaturate the blues here so that they don't take strength. Their strength of those blues wouldn't take away from the primary subject. Okay, minor points, but important. I think it's just a way that I think maybe this picture could be better. Even so, it's an 8, so that's not a bad thing.
Okay, Bryson, may I interrupt for a second?
Go ahead.
Are you okay if we ask the creator of the image just to comment?
Be my guest.
Yeah, do you mind going? We'll go back to number 1 and ask the photographer to comment, to identify themselves and to comment about the image. Okay.
One's from Mary Eileen Carson.
Okay, anything you want to tell us about the image?
It was from the last trip we had to the state capitol, the club trip to the state capitol. And down where the cafeteria is in the back entrance, there's some hallways that kind of shoot off, and they have offices back there, and some of the legislators have offices. So I went wandering down there looking and shooting, and then all of a sudden, you know, it turned around and saw how the hallway curved, and those windows all seemed to break up into different reflections. So I started shooting that. So that's where that's from, the state capitol.
Very good. Thank you, Mary Eileen.
Very
Okay.
good.
You're welcome. Thank you, Bryson.
Number 2.
It's Jackie. I appreciate all the comments on the picture. I can see where I can make improvements. This was a very intense tour that we took to England, to Europe. And this is, of course, the tower bridge. And it was getting to be a stormy night. And I couldn't get any more height where we were to get a better picture from the angle I more or less wanted it, but I can see where I could make some improvements, and I really do appreciate that insight. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. Okay, Bryson, we're good to go to number 3.
Number 3 is Overachiever, and this is really, really nice. I like it a lot. I would very carefully check the color in here. It looks to me like there's a little bit of cyan that I would really kind of like to just absolutely make positive that goes to white, neutral white, because it wants to stand out. And if it has any color at all that is similar, if you will, to something that's going on in the background, and cyans are, you know, blues with some green in, it does tend to take away from it just a little bit. I like the composition. I like the idea. You know, the title says it all. I am a big fan of retouching, and I really, really spend a lot of time on my images getting rid of distractions. I think this, especially being as out of focus as it is, and this little piece down in here on the left-hand side, are distractions that I would remove, because I think that would strengthen the look of the image. There's a little tiny thing here. These up here don't bother me so much. Maybe these 2 little out of focus spots would be something I would pay attention to. But again, those are very, very minor issues. There is one thing that I'm very, very interested in terms of processing images, and that is detailed whites. It's difficult to manage this in Lightroom alone, but if you're if you're a Photoshop user, I tend to add contrast to the highlights. It's not quite so easily done in Lightroom, but you can actually force more detail into these high value areas, and that's something that I teach my students to do, because it really can, especially with light colored buildings, highlights on people, and especially with white flowers, you can really bring in a little extra contrast to the high values without affecting the rest of the image. That's one of the limitations that most people have with Lightroom, is they see everything as a global issue, not a local issue. So they don't do as much masking and fine detail work as Lightroom has been able to kind of hand you with some of the new masking techniques. But it can be done, but it's not as easy to do as it might be in Photoshop, at least from my perspective. But again, you know, with the exception of the minor details, this is a very strong image and is quite nice to look at. I like it a lot. I'd give it a 9
Very
based
good.
on.
Well, let's hear from the photographer.
That's mine, Lynn Garwood. This was part of a workshop that I did that was about finding beauty. And I did increase the contrast in that flower, in the whites or the highlights, I'm not sure, in Lightroom. So I'll have to try it in Photoshop. Thank you.
Sure enough. Number 4, feeding. This is nicely done. I like, this is also a 9. This is probably a 9 point something. It's good composition. I like the concept of putting this more or less as a central subject. And then, of course, the bee. I don't think that the extra room at the top, however, is really valuable. So my primary consideration on this would be to crop the image. And I would say, okay, whatever you've got down here in terms of space, put the same basic thing up here. So I just crop off this extra stuff at the top, and you'd end up with a slightly vertical square. And I think that would just strengthen the image. Because there's stuff up here that just doesn't do anything for you. So a simple crop, I think, would be the only thing I would change on the image. Good, you.
Very good. Who created this one?
I did. This is Mark. Bryson, I gotta take that your composition idea very earnestly. This is the second time you've told me I've had too much space on top. I'll take a look at it. Thank you.
Sure enough. Now, this I found it particularly interesting because it all of the conversation about verticals and the transformation of a subject and everything like that. This really is something that makes you stop and think, because the vertical on this image is not what you think it is. It's actually back here. It's this line on the wall going down to the base of the image. So this is not the vertical. And if you made it the vertical, I don't think this image would be as interesting. I think that this being off of center, or off of vertical, I should say, really makes this image very, very strong. And it really does take your eye and just make you move right down to the bottom. And of course, this support information here helps. I like this a lot. I think this is very good. It could be a 10. I would take a little, what?
A 10?
Somebody groaned. What?
Ooh. We don't hear many 10s from you.
It was 9.732. I think with a linear gradient, you've got all this dark corners here. I'd pull a linear gradient in here to darken. I'd pull a linear gradient in here and make these highlights closer to these, so that nothing is pulling my eye away from this center. I just really don't want to go up here. I don't want to go over here. I want to stay in the middle. So I'd be really, really careful. Sometimes one of the things that I find I do a lot with images is I will correct them, I will process them, I'll play with them. And you wake up the next morning and go, oh, I missed that, and I should have done this. And then a week later, you do the same thing. I'm processing images that are 7 years old because I still find things that I think could be done better. But this is very, very strong. This is an excellent image.
All right. Who's the photographer?
That would be me, George Kurzik. I shot this at the Biltmore Estates, long exposure HDR, which is typical of almost all my work. They didn't allow tripods, so I had to find a place to allow my wide angle to rest. And I actually had the camera teetering over the edge for, I think over the 5 images, it probably totaled maybe a minute and a half of exposure.
Wow.
So I could lose the people going up and down the stairs. And yeah, and Bryson, that's exactly what I do. I edit in the evening, I re-edit in the morning, and I edit 3 or 4 more times in the week before I file it.
Well, You did good. You got a lot of good stuff here to work with, and I think you did a marvelous job.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
There we go. This is you capture this and you just go home and pat yourself on the back, right? I mean, this doesn't happen to you every day. This is such a nice image. I'm particularly fond of the detail in the whites and how much, the soft feel of the image in the primary subject. I think this is really, really done well. This is an 8.9. This is, this could be really, really close to a 9. And I think the big thing is I would use a very strong vignette on this, and I would just darken these backgrounds, colors and things in order to just make your eye go there with no question whatsoever. There's a there's a thing in, I'm assuming that everybody's using Lightroom. So if I'm wrong on that, I apologize, but you have the hue, saturation, and lightness sliders in Lightroom, and one of them is luminance. And when you have something that's competing, like these brighter greens here, you can change the hue of those greens, but you can also change the luminance. So you could darken just these down without doing any vignetting or any masking or anything, and just pull these down so that they don't become a secondary thing for the eye to pay attention to. But it's a very, very, very nice image. Next.
Okay, the photographer.
That's mine, Kurt Wilkie, and that was taken at Kiwanis Lake just after a downpour. And, I thank you very much for your comments. Yeah, I see we're vignetting a little heavier. I do put a vignette on. It's not near as heavy as what I think it can go to as well. Thank you.
Sure enough, vignettes are something that sometimes a subtle vignette is all you need. I always said that vignettes should be felt rather than seen, but in this case, I would just really, I just want to vignette this picture. So there you go. Okay. Angelica. This is nice. I love the composition. I like the movement within the image. The lighting is good. A little bit of a Rembrandt light here, and coming from the far side, so it's called what you call short light. Very nicely done. My single criticism to this, and this again is very, very close to a 9 image, is that the overall contrast is good, but the local contrast within the subject is just a little shy of what I think it may be. When you do in Lightroom, if you're doing this in Lightroom and you go to, in the basic, you go to black and white, the HSL color changes to black and white. And what it gives you one black and white mix set of sliders with the different colors on. And what you can do in there is play with each color and see what kind of an effect it has on the tonal values in the image. And if you start playing with that, your black and white conversions will change dramatically in Lightroom, because it will have a stronger effect on the image than you think. And if you haven't done that before, you'll discover that it's something you will not give up the next time you make a black and white conversion. Nice image. I'll bet you I know who did it.
This is Dick Messner. Thank you, Bryson.
Yep.
I did this at a workshop about 6 weeks ago down in Hagerstown, Maryland. Learned a terrific amount, primarily how to set up lights to achieve different things. And I thank you for your comments very much.
Good job, Dick. Very good job.
It's good.
Number 8, Church and State. This is an 8. One of the things that I discovered a long, long time ago, people say night photography. Night photography is best shot when it isn't quite night, because when you get to being night, you've lost a lot of light that you could be using to help make an image. So all of the areas that become really, really dark, you lose definition and you lose separation to the sky, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When I shoot night images, I start like 30 seconds after the sun goes down. And I start paying attention to the highlights on the building. And then one of the things you have to understand about exposure is that the difference between one value that's a highlight and another value that's a shadow is the contrast between the two, or the difference in the illumination between the two. You always expose for the highlights because in digital, that's what you need to do. The shadow part of the image then becomes a contrast issue. So it's how much light you have in the shadows compared to the exposure that you are forced to make for the highlights. So as the light begins to fade, you shoot and then you wait 30 seconds and you shoot again. You wait 2 minutes, you shoot again. And then, of course, the rest of it is once you've got something that you can work with, then you can decide how much contrast to have in the image by varying the shadows and the highlights and the whites and the blacks and of course the contrast slider itself. The last thing, I do something a little differently than most people do. I almost never touch the exposure slider until I'm done playing with blacks, whites, shadows, and highlights. So, give that some thought. I think it's well done. I think it's nicely done. I just personally would like to see a little bit more information in some of these shadow areas, because I think it would make for a slightly softer image, and maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you like the drama, so that's fine. This is an 8. It's well done.
Okay,
And
who created this image? Okay, you'll need to unmute yourself if you're present.
Nobody here?
Let's ask Rick if he knows who the photographer is.
Yeah, this is done by Jay Himes.
Okay, Jay. Guess Jay's not with us this evening.
Okay.
Don't see him on board, so we'll go to the next one.
All right. Old Spice. I will say right up front that as soon as you start to try to shoot product, you're walking into an area that is complex. Let's put it that way. I did this for better part of 40 years. And at the very beginning of this, I made all of the mistakes you can possibly, well, maybe not all of them. I probably make a few that I missed that didn't quite, I'll figure them out in the future. But there are things that you need to consider when you are doing product photography. Compositionally, everything here happens in this area. Boom, it's all done. So you've got all of this space and you're kind of wasting it. I would compose this differently. I would put the cabbage off a little bit to the right. I would put this behind the all space so that the part of this covers maybe, a third or more of this can, so that you have 1 and then 2, and then this one would be sitting maybe like it is in comparison to this, but just these two overlapping a little bit. And then that whole composition of these 3 elements would go off to the left. So now your eye is going to move from the left to the right and up to the cabbage and then rotate back down. And now you have something that compositionally feels better. Here you've got 3 dead center and a subject behind it, dead center. And the knife is really pretty much dead center, given the handle and all that stuff. So there's a a lack of compositional intensity, let me put it that way, that I think could be in this image that's simply not there. The glows in the background, you want to watch the way you light your background so that this glow maybe goes down and breaks this line here of the, this glow is stopping somewhere. I'm not sure exactly why, because I don't see a table or anything there, but maybe over here I do. But I think this could be compositionally a little bit stronger. And I think, if you want to play with that, you could make a nice image out of this, and I'll give that a 7.
Okay, let's hear from the photographer.
That's Diane's. And since I moved from a house to an apartment, I got rid of all my studio lights, and I'm dealing with an off-camera speed light in a room with a white ceiling and white walls, and the lighting is challenging. And I want to get into some still life. So I appreciate your comments.
Well, still life and photography is complicated. And lighting, of course, is one of the real challenges, because you're not finding an image, you're creating an image. And that puts a real load on you as far as composition, as far as lighting, as far as so believe me, I understand. I think this isn't a bad start, but keep working at it, because I love this kind of stuff. So very good, very good.
Hey, thank you.
Out of the way. This picture fascinates me. I don't know what this guy's name is, but he looks like somebody that I wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. I like this. It's nice and sharp. It's compelling from the standpoint of what's going on within the image. I have no real issues with that. So we're going to give this an 8+. What I would do with this is, again, you've got this, where does the eye go in the image, and what happens that wants to take impact away from your subject? All of this background color, if it were muted more, if it were desaturated a little bit, then all the color would be on the primary subject, and the eye would really nail the subject and not pay as much attention to the background. I maybe would darken it, maybe desaturate, especially these hot blues here. But I think if you did that, you would find that this subject would pop out even stronger than it does simply because of its obvious impact. Okay. So it's a good image. It's a strong image. I just think that a few things that could be done that would just really give it a bit more impact.
Okay, who created this image?
Yeah, it's Rich Scar. Thanks, thanks, Bryce. Yeah, I hadn't thought about the desaturation. I think that is a good point. So thanks for the rating. I think I still have an invoice from you for AMP, so I'll sign off on that and you can get paid. Thanks.
Boy, if you got an invoice hanging around after all this time.
Yeah, you obviously didn't need the money.
Oh, good grief. You got 10 grand hanging around, you don't know what to do with it. You just send it on over. I'll be fine.
Will do.
I'm not quite sure what happened to this image. I think maybe this wasn't what the maker intended to share. It almost looks like in the process of making a JPEG for competition, there was an active layer, and this is what showed up in the transmission, as opposed to the flattened image or the composite at the top, because it's obviously just out of focus everywhere. So there's just not much to pay attention here. Compositionally, if this were all sharp, I think we're on our way to something interesting. This little element of the picture in the background is kind of nice. I think this element interrupts. I would like it to be darker. this flow here is not so bad, but this should be darker. This is fine. I'm not even sure what it is because it's so out of focus, but it needs a little bit of work, especially in terms of sharpness.
Yeah, let's hear from the photographer.
Hey, Bryson, thanks very much. This is Dave Marchetto. I was very interested in your take on this pinhole camera image. So that's why I submitted it. What you sort of see, you don't always get with the pinhole lens. And, it's just very, very challenging. And I'm just, very interested in your take on it. Appreciate it.
Pinhole, that didn't even cross my mind. So when you're dealing with pinhole, you're dealing with what, week-long exposures?
Let me just say, I couldn't see what I was photographing.
Well, yeah, I would bet you couldn't. Yeah, that's I didn't even think about that as a possibility. But it's really interesting from that perspective because it's like you said, if you couldn't see what you were photographing, I wonder if you actually had a problem focusing the image because with a pinhole, you've got depth of field up the wazoo.
That's so true. And that knife handle is just about touching the pinhole lens. So it was just a lot of fun. Mike Donovan, about a year and then some ago, gave the club a pinhole camera talk. I don't know if that's still available. Maybe Dennis would be able to say if it's available or not, but he described a lot of the challenges and ins and outs of pinhole photography. So I thought I'd give it a chance, and I appreciate your take on it, Bryson.
Sure enough.
Hey, Bryson, what was your score on that?
Oh, I'd probably a 6.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Flynn and Indy. This is another 9+. I could go a 10 on this. The only thing that I want to do with this is possibly crop it to a vertical. I think there's more room on the left and right than there needs to be, especially on the right. But I just did a real quick crop on this, and I find that if I make this vertical, it just seems to sit better with me than the way it is. But that's really nitpicking, and that's where we are tonight. We're nitpicking because the pictures are so good we have to in order to come up with a criticism. This is very strong. I like, the fact that you can actually believe they're both looking at the same place. So I don't have a lot of comments at all. Maybe darken this a little bit. And I should say something about darkening. When you're looking at something like this, just darkening it is not necessarily what you want to do. Sometimes you want to lower the whites as opposed to just simply darkening that thing, because if you darken it, then all of the values are going to go down. And what you want to do is you want to take the impact of the higher values down. So you would want to lower the brightness on that, drop the highlights, if you will, and not necessarily just simply darken it. So exposure wouldn't be what I would go for. I would go for highlight values in order to darken that area.
Okay, can we hear from the photographer?
Hi, it's Elaine Shook. This photo was taken at the National Aviary. Flynn and Indy are the ambassador eagles at the aviary. And the environment they are living in, they're in captivity, of course, but they're not in a cage. They're in a glassed-in enclosure, a very large one. But their surroundings inside of this enclosure is incredibly ugly. It's the only way I can put it. Very dark wood slats with very bright slats of light coming through them. So I had no choice but to black out the background. which I didn't object to, but that forced me to spend many, many hours just dodging and burning. I didn't have a lot else to do to this image, but dodging and burning. And I frankly, I never use the exposure slider at all. I always use the whites and highlights or the masking tools to do that, and did concentrate mostly on reducing some of the highlights and creating a little more definition in the white feathers, but also bringing out the orange feathers and texture in the backs and the side of these birds.
Yeah.
So I appreciate what you're saying about the branch. I did reduce the highlights on that, but I can see that it wasn't enough. It was very hot, direct light coming from above them. It was a glass ceiling, bird-safe glass ceiling, and it was midday, so the light was very harsh coming on top of them. So it was a challenge with the dodging and burning, but that is what I spent most of my time on. Thank you for your comments.
You did very well. I'll adjust this all the way up to a 10. We'll just give it a 10 and be done with it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You do nice work, so I know what you're saying there, and I like your thinking. Spring snowfall. This image and this image are both going to talk about one thing in particular, and that is how bright is the image and contrast, both local and global contrast. This is very open to me, and I think if I were looking at this scene, I would want to believe that it's just a little bit darker than this. But I wouldn't do that with exposure slider. I would do that by dealing with the whites and the highlights, because I think if this thing were just a little bit darker, that it would have a stronger impact. It just seems to be a little light to me, a little open. And I think probably the strongest thing in there is the light on the side of the tree. That's what I really want to pull down. This is very close to center. In fact, the center line could be the left edge. I could maybe afford to lose a little bit on the right, so I could crop some of the bottom and some of the right, so that would move this very slightly to the right. Not enough to go all the way to the thirds, if you will, maybe more to go like the golden rectangle, just have this at the 60% mark instead of so close to center. But again, we're getting really into the nitpicking idea, because this is a good 8+, close to a 9 image to begin with. So we're really looking for stuff to pick at. And I think the other thing is that there's so much uniformity of color going on in here that is so nice. And then this yellow wants to stick out and grab me. So I would want to go into the hue, saturation and lightness. And I would want to fuss around a little bit with those yellows. It might be the greens, but I doubt it. It's probably going to be the yellows. And see if I couldn't make those look a little bit more like they belonged with these blue greens, which are a little bit, I think, more appealing to the eye. The yellow greens stick out and they jump at me. And so I think I'd want to soften that impact so that this wonderful stuff that's feeling up here feels the same down here. Yep, details. Did I give it a
Thank you, Bryson. This is Joe Farrell. That's my image. And I really appreciate your comments about the yellow down below. And it was interesting, before I submitted this, I bumped up the exposure just to brighten it up, because I normally have my images darker. But I really appreciate that. That was very insightful about that yellow, and it has always bothered me a little bit, but I should have done that. Yep. Thank you.
Excellent. Very, very nice. This image has similar issues in terms of the fact I really want to see it darker. But this gives me an opportunity to talk about something that I doubt most people do. We tend to look at images, especially if we're Lightroom users, we look at them as global. And we forget that the brightness and contrast of images can be local. So if you look at this, what's happening down here, the darkness, the exposure value, if you will, is pretty good. I think the contrast is a little high. You go up here from his arm on up to his face, and it's bright, especially compared to what's going on down here. So we need to think in terms of what could we do to this to make it fit better with what's going on down here. This is where a mask with a gradient would come in, and I would pull that down across from this corner up here, down across all the way to the elbow. And then I would start playing with the highlight slider and with the white slider and possibly with the exposure slider, because this looks bright, this looks better. One of the ways to analyze an image for yourself, and this is something that if you're a Photoshop user, would be a handy thing to do too, and that's to use the crop tool. Crop a portion of the image, like right into his hand and face, et cetera, and then process that to look as good as it can possibly look. Then undo the crop and crop the bottom and process it to look as good as it can possibly look. And I guarantee you that those two processes will be different in contrast and in brightness, et cetera. If you're working in Photoshop, you can then take those two images, export them to Photoshop, and you can use a mask to blend them together. If you are working only in Lightroom, then you need to create a mask, like I said before, probably a linear gradient, and just draw that down here and bring these tones down so that they match what's going on with the rest of the image. This, you got vignetting here, and then all this brightness, and the face is way too bright. This stuff's way too bright in the highlights. So you actually have two images that are fighting with each other in terms of brightness and contrast. Okay, does that make sense? It's about a 7 image.
Okay, who's the creator?
That was me, that's Sherry Stanball. This is a composite. It's done in Photoshop, and I did cut it out. And I did add darkness, and I probably added too much darkness because I was playing around with it too much. So all the things that you had said is probably things that I had added. I don't really work in Lightroom very much. I do most of my work in Photoshop, and most of the time I do composites.
Well, in that case, I think you're already on the way to where you need to go. You just need to think in terms of the local areas, as I said. So you would be processing them differently, probably with selections and masks. And so if you're working with Photoshop, that probably isn't something that surprises you.
Okay, I probably added darkness to give it a mood effect. I do that sometimes. And that's probably where I made my mistake. I like, sometimes I darken it in the corner to give it sort of a mystical look kind of thing.
You know, there are no mistakes in Photoshop. There are just simply experiences.
Okay.
Then you go, oops, and you go back and change it. That's all.
Okay.
Number 15, bear with me. Now, this is very bright, very open. This looks to me like what the camera would see. But you need to process this in order to get more impact out of it and to bring the tonal values in, rein them in, if you will. This would be to me, a very good exposure from a camera standpoint, because I don't see any whites that are blown out. So if you've got a subject and the lighting and everything to the point where you've got a contrast range that's very manageable, now all you really need to do is take the blacks down, take the shadows down a little bit, and once you get done fussing with the whites, the blacks, the shadows, and the highlights, then you can determine whether an exposure change is needed. You may not find that's necessary at all, or you may discover that a quarter, a third, maybe even as much as a half a stop is all you really need to do to rein this in. But he's very open, and this is all nice and pastel. That's not a bad thing, except it just doesn't seem appropriate compared to the subject. So that, and then maybe a little vignette, especially down in here, to add some contrast to this texture that he's walking on, would give a little bit more of an impact to the image. So that's a 6.
Okay, and who's the photographer?
Hi, Bryson. That's me, Julie Bale. Thank you very much. No, I appreciated your I don't even know what the word is. Approach to the exposure there, and I wasn't sure, seeing that the subject was so dark. I did balance for the highlights, the shadows, whites and blacks, but I think perhaps maybe making it too bright. So I will definitely go back and revisit that.
It looks like an image you should play with, because it's a good capture. So, don't give up yet.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Sure enough. If you look here, it seems to me that this image was rotated to try to straighten something out, like the verticals on the Capitol, because you forgot to crop off your edges in order to get back into the picture. So that's the first thing that caught my attention. The second thing is you've got a symmetrical subject, so shoot it that way. You want to be over here to the right so that this is right in the middle and this is right in the middle. It's all in the middle. It's symmetrical. So if you're going to get close, go all the way and just make it dead center. If you want to get off to the edge, you've got to go off to the edge far enough to convince the viewer that what you're doing is intentional. That's the big difference there in composition between symmetry and whatever the word is for non-symmetry. But again, here with similar to the other Capitol shot we saw a little bit earlier, it would be really nice if this was shot earlier so that there was enough light hanging around to separate the background from the sky and give me a little more detail in these darker areas, instead of relying entirely on the artificial lighting, if you will, to make the image. This isn't too bad. It's a little bright, but again, when you're making exposure, you're stuck with the highlights. You have to expose for those brights, and then the contrast of the image is handed to you by the difference between the highlights and the amount of light that's in the shadow areas. So that's a 6.
Okay, let's hear from the photographer.
That's mine, Bryson Terry Longenecker. I didn't even see that. I forgot to crop that out. Oh my, I've never done that before. Thank you for your comments. I'll definitely work on that.
First time for everything, Terry.
Well, that's the way you learn. By making a mistake. Thank you.
Number 17. This is really, really close. It seems to me that it wants to run uphill at the right-hand edge. And I'm not sure that you're going to see that the way I do, but it just doesn't seem to me like it is sitting perfectly square, if you will. I'm not even sure I know how to explain that in a way that would get across the way I feel about it. But it just feels like there's a horizontal plane here that's running uphill. It's higher on the right than it is on the left. So I would want to rotate that very slightly clockwise and then possibly crop off a little bit on the right-hand side. And again, like I'm saying, these images are so good that you just have to pick at the nits in order to have something to say, because it's not a bad image at all. That's an 8.
Okay, who created this one? Okay, you'll need to unmute yourself and
Somebody that's not here.
okay, Rick, who did this one?
Tony Tomolitis. Tomolonis.
Okay, yeah, Anthony, yeah, he's not here tonight. Okay.
Okay. Salvador Dali's neighborhood. I have 2 primary issues with this. First of all, it's very bright. Second of all, it's incredibly busy. There's just a whole lot of stuff going on that you're not really sure what you're supposed to be looking at. So if this guy is the primary subject and being dead center, I would assume that that's a possibility. I would base my colors choice on him. I would base my contrast choice on him. I'd let this go a little bit darker. I might tend to crop this in order to get rid of some distractions, because there sure are enough of them. I mean, you get over here and this color on the wall is, of course, way stronger than the neutrals on the subject. You got this distraction in the back, which is not too easy to understand. You've got these elements down here that are interrupting the composition. I just think that this is a a subject that it would be very, very difficult to photograph in the first place. And I just really think that that's the problem. It's, what do you do with a subject that has this much stuff interfering with it in order to make the image strong? Very difficult to do. Despite all of that, in terms of the overall composition, I can't argue with your decision. I just think there's too much stuff in the way. I can't argue with the exposure. I think the subject is a little bit bright, but we'll give it a 7.
Okay, let's hear from the photographer.
Hi, it's Tom Stoddard. This was taken on a vacation to Spain recently, and it was taken just outside the Salvador Dali Museum and Theater, which, if you've ever been there, is an incredibly busy place, practically mind-blowing. And when I came out and saw this, that was, I was used to seeing all that busyness, and every time I went back and looked at this picture, I just kept being drawn back to it because there's so much to see in it. So that's what I liked about it. But I appreciate your feedback.
Very good. I have a difficult time looking at this picture because there's some small parts that seem to be sharp and then other parts that seem to not be sharp. And I'm not quite sure why. I really don't buy the concept. I don't like the orange in the sky. There's some edge masking here that is typical of what happens when you shift the color, and because Photoshop and Lightroom make decisions that can very often be very radical in their determination. In other words, it's going to be yes or no, and then when it gets to the point where it doesn't know whether to do yes or no, you end up with these little funny lines. The clouds are bright. There should be more detail in some of these areas, and like this, and then of course we've got this. It's sharp over here and it's sharp here, but it gets fuzzy here and it gets out of focus over here on the right. I'm just not quite sure exactly what to think about that, but that's a 6.
Okay, let's hear from the photographer.
Hey, Dennis, it's me, George. This is one of my infrared pictures. And I chose purposely the orange kind of a sky because if it's going to be like global warming, you don't know what the sky is going to look like. I had not noticed a little fringing up there on the top of the clouds, but this is it's something that the picture I like generally because I think it has some impact. And I think the title goes well with it. But there are some places that are a little out of focus. There may have been some breeze. This was taken up on the in North Carolina on the not the Appalachian Trail, the Appalachian well, whatever.
The Blue Ridge Parkway.
Anyway, yeah, the Blue Ridge Parkway. Thank you, Joe. I keep getting confused between Skyline Drive and Blue Ridge Parkway, but
I think
anyway.
just in the overall composition thought, I think maybe if you cropped off some of the left and some of the top so that this tree ended up in a better compositional space, that would strengthen the image. It's too close to center for me, and I don't shoot infrared. I know a little bit about it, and a little bit will get you in trouble every time. So I can't be terribly critical and that might have something to do with the rendering of the branches. But I'll leave that up to you.
Well, it may very well. Thank you, Bryson.
Sure enough. Lighthouse in a storm. I'm confused a little bit about the verticals. This is nice. This seems to be about right. And then this tilts and this tilts even more. So that could be a rotational thing as opposed to dealing with the transform aspect. So that's something I would be very careful to watch for. Good detail in the whites. Curious about the lighting. There's something about this that just doesn't seem quite right. This is all one thing going on up here. And then all of a sudden, there's this brightness coming up from the bottom of the image, especially on this building here. If it were just simply the rocks, I think that could be handled by doing a selection or a linear gradient or something and darkening them so that the eye would stay up here where it belongs. But it almost seems as if there's light coming up from the bottom of this image up in here, and this is darker than this. And there's this all brighter than this area is. So I'm not quite sure what that feeling is, unless the maker did some processing in there that caused that to happen, perhaps to darken this, but without giving this the consideration that it deserved. So I think it's a nice image. I think it's an image worth playing with, and I think it could be done better just with some more attention to detail in the processing. We'll give it a 7.
Okay, let's hear from the photographer.
Yeah, that's mine, Jim Breilinger. I did play with the rocks down below. They look kind of flat, not interesting. Apparently I overdid it. Didn't look at the relationship between the top of the picture and the bottom. So I'll definitely go back and play with it, and tweak it a little bit.
Okay, if you deal with contrast, one of the things you have to know about contrast, and if you watch the histogram, you'll see this. If you increase the contrast, you'll find that the darks get darker, and that's interesting. The midtones probably don't change very much, but the brights are going to get brighter along with the darks getting darker. So actually using contrast as a control is not always the best way to get contrast into an image area like that, especially if you're using a gradient. If you want to add contrast, the thing to do is play with the blacks and the shadows in order to get things to go down. You may in fact have to lower the highlights and the whites at the same time. But if you use the contrast control alone, it's not necessarily going to get you where you want to be. So, give that stuff some thought. The other thing you have to be careful about too with that is that when you deal with clarity, when you raise the clarity in order to give the appearance of sharpness, you will also be slightly raising the contrast. So you want to be careful with that too.
Yeah, I bumped the clarity up overall to about a 4.
Oh, that's decent. That's not bad.
And believe it or not, the sky was added.
Okay, all done.
All
Thank
right. Does anyone have any specific questions or comments for Bryson? If you do, go ahead.
I have a question for Bryson, just in general. Are you talking about general or just on this image demos?
General, anything.
In general. You mentioned numerous times the histogram. When you are processing your images, do you look at the histogram? Is that your guide, or is that something that it really doesn't make any difference? It's really what the impact on the image is.
That's a hard question to answer. I do sometimes pay attention to the histogram in terms of determining black and white points. I don't want to clip. And sometimes that indicator on the histogram is a little bit more of a warning bell, if you will, than just simply looking at the tones. But that's kind of almost a brutal way of looking at it. I don't use the histogram as a tool or as a crutch so much as I look at it as a confirmation that whatever else I'm doing makes sense. And that is probably a little hard to understand. I don't know if that makes any sense to you at all. Some of the things that can happen when you're dealing with the whites and the blacks are that you can, particularly with the whites, if you bring the whites down and you look at the histogram, you'll see that right-hand information start to go down toward the center of the histogram. When that happens, you may have, or you probably have gone too far, and you're graying down your whites, you're graying down your highlights. That's a big warning bell as far as I'm concerned. We pull the whites down and look at the histogram, and if you see it go past that, there's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas of the histogram. If it goes beyond the first one at the right hand side down to the second one, you may have gone too far down with your whites, depending on what the content is and how far down into the grays you want to get. But you can gray an image down very quickly if you're not careful, and that's kind of a warning bell, if you will. You can do a same thing with the blacks in terms that if you raise them too much in order to try to save the shadows, that you can lose the impact. You can lose the contrast by bringing the blacks up too much. So that would be another warning bell, if you will. But I wouldn't say that I use the histogram itself as a tool. You kind of use it more of a confirmation that whatever else I'm doing makes some kind of sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, hi, this is Dave Marquetto. Bryson, I kind of missed the processing of the black and white image, and I think you talked about adjusting colors that somehow reference, to the black and white values. Can you maybe just repeat or clarify for me what you said?
Yeah.
It sounded very interesting.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. When you convert an image in Lightroom to black and white, the HSL slider in color changes to black and white.
Okay, I get that.
You see that? Okay, now if you go to that black and white, you have it's called black and white mix.
Okay.
You see that? If you have it open, you'll see that. Now what you've got is 8 sliders that go from red down to magenta. And what they're going to do is they're going to change the value of the original color image. And that's going to influence the conversion to black and white. So,
Right, right.
so if you have a subject that's red, for example, and you convert to black and white, it's going to end up a certain shade of gray. But if you take that black and white mix slider and darken that red, it's going to darken the shade of gray in the black and white.
Right.
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 So you have two. This is especially interesting if you have a subject that's maybe wearing blue pants and a red shirt, and you convert it to black and white, and because of whatever those colors happen to be, it almost looks as if the shirt and the pants match each other. That probably won't happen, but it's a good way to have a conversation. So you lighten or darken the red, and then you lighten or darken the blues, and you can make a change between the shirt and the pants just simply by varying the original colors so that the conversion to black and white reflects a difference in terms of the shades of gray that are represented. Once you do it, it will make sense.
Yeah. Can you help me with a little confusion of about filters? So what you said isn't really about adjusting a red filter or a blue filter. It has more to do with the hue, saturation versus a filter. Does that make sense? Or?
I'm not sure what you mean by.
Well, like, for example, if you put a red filter on a black and white image, is that similar to what you're talking about?
No. Well, that worked in film. You could put a red filter on a black and white.
Yeah. So
film. That's not the way it works in digital.
Okay.
Because in digital, you should be capturing a color image, and then you should be doing all of your conversions from the color image. And the black and white mix is where you can control the brightness or darkness of any given color, and therefore how it is translated to a shade of gray and black and white. That's really, really good for skies, because the blues and the aquas and in some cases even some of the greens, you can really make a big difference on a sky in a black and white conversion by changing those values. So that becomes really, really important.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
I would like to just thank everyone for submitting their photos, and I'd like to thank Bryson for his comments. I have learned a lot from each of you tonight, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Dick. Yeah, I'll second that, and I want to thank everyone for entering their images. That was very nice to have 20 images for a competition. And Bryson, thank you very much for your comments. They were very instructive. Now, as we usually do, if you'll unmute yourself, we will give Bryson a nice round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bryson.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bryson.
thanks, guys.
Oh, thank you. You all did very nice work.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everyone, and good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night, everybody.
Dennis, stop the recording.